Welcome back. Tonight, we explore the story of Western philosophy, where history's greatest minds pondered life's deepest mysteries. From Socrates walking the streets of ancient Athens to today's thinkers wrestling with questions of consciousness, technology, and what it truly means to be human. As always, relax and let yourself drift away. Let's begin. In ancient Athens, a man faced execution for his relentless questioning. Socrates, the condemned philosopher, sparked a tradition of intellectual challenge that would ripple through millennia. This pivotal moment set the stage for Western philosophy's complex relationship with authority. From the grand ideals of Plato's Republic to the pragmatic counsel of Machiavelli's Prince, philosophers have both confronted and legitimized political systems. Their ideas, often controversial and sometimes dangerous, have shaped the very foundations of governance. This documentary explores the subtle yet profound ways philosophical thought has influenced the structures of power that govern our lives. But to understand how such radical questioning became possible, we must journey back to an earlier time. In the cradle of Western civilization, a revolutionary shift in human thought was about to unfold. The Greek world of the 6th century BCE was steeped in mythology, with gods and supernatural forces explaining everything from the changing seasons to the fates of mortals. This rich tapestry of stories provided a comforting framework for understanding the world, but it was about to face its greatest challenge. A new class of thinkers emerged in the Greek colonies of Ionia, on the western coast of modern-day Turkey. These early philosophers, known as the pre-Socratics, sought rational, naturalistic answers to the fundamental questions of existence, lighting a fuse of inquiry that would spark the birth of Western philosophy. Thales of Miletus, often considered the first philosopher, proposed that water was the primary substance of the universe, from which all other things were derived. This seemingly simple claim represented a monumental shift in thinking. Instead of attributing the world's origins to the actions of gods, Thales sought a natural, observable principle to explain reality. Building on this naturalistic approach, Anaximander introduced the concept of the apeiron, an infinite, boundless substance that was the source of all things. This abstract idea challenged the notion of personified deities, suggesting instead an impersonal, fundamental principle underlying reality. The intellectual ferment continued with Heraclitus of Ephesus, who introduced the concept of constant change as a fundamental aspect of the universe. His famous assertion that one cannot step in the same river twice encapsulated a worldview that saw reality as a ceaseless flux. This dynamic vision of the cosmos stood in stark contrast to the static, divinely ordered world of mythology. These early philosophical inquiries faced resistance from religious authorities and conservative elements of Greek society. Their ideas threatened the established order, challenging the power structures that relied on traditional mythological explanations to maintain their influence. Despite this opposition, the seeds of rational inquiry had been planted. The pre-Socratics' bold questioning of established beliefs set the stage for the golden age of Greek philosophy that was to follow. Their legacy would be carried forward by the towering figures of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who would further refine and expand upon their ideas. By seeking natural explanations for phenomena previously attributed to divine intervention, the pre-Socratics laid the groundwork for scientific inquiry. Their emphasis on reason and observation as tools for understanding the world would become cornerstones of Western philosophical and scientific thought. The pre-Socratics' willingness to challenge established beliefs set a precedent for critical thinking that would resonate throughout history. They demonstrated that even the most deeply held convictions could be subjected to rational scrutiny, a principle that would prove essential to the development of philosophy, science, and democratic societies. The impact of this philosophical revolution extended beyond the realm of ideas. As Greek society grappled with these new ways of thinking, it experienced profound social and political changes. The rise of democracy in Athens, for instance, can be seen as partly influenced by the spirit of questioning and debate fostered by philosophical inquiry. The pre-Socratic thinkers paved the way for more systematic approaches to philosophy. While their ideas were often speculative, they established key concepts and questions that would be explored for centuries to come. The nature of reality, the relationship between appearance and truth, and the possibility of human knowledge became central concerns of Western philosophy, shaping the intellectual landscape for generations to follow. But it was in Athens that these philosophical seeds would truly flourish. There, a balding, snub-nosed stonecutter emerged who would push critical inquiry to its limits. Socrates turned his gaze to an equally profound mystery: human knowledge itself. His method of relentless questioning would shake the very foundations of Greek society and spark a philosophical revolution that continues to resonate today. Socrates developed a unique approach to philosophical inquiry, later termed the Socratic method. This technique involved engaging individuals in dialogue through probing questions designed to expose the limitations in their beliefs. Unlike the pre-Socratics, who focused primarily on explaining the natural world, Socrates directed his attention to ethical and epistemological concerns, seeking to understand the nature of virtue, justice, and knowledge itself. The philosopher's approach was deceptively simple, yet profoundly unsettling. He would ask his interlocutor to define a concept, then systematically dismantle their arguments, revealing hidden assumptions and logical flaws. This process often left his conversation partners in a state of aporia or puzzlement about ideas they had previously taken for granted. Socrates' claim to ignorance became a central feature of his philosophical approach. His famous assertion, "I know that I know nothing," paradoxically highlighted his wisdom and demonstrated a form of intellectual humility that stood in stark contrast to the confident assertions of his contemporaries. This stance allowed him to approach each conversation with genuine curiosity, while simultaneously exposing the pretensions of those who claim to possess unassailable knowledge. The Socratic method proved particularly threatening to the established order in Athens. By questioning commonly held beliefs about virtue, justice, and governance, Socrates challenged the foundations of Athenian society. His critiques extended to democratic institutions, raising uncomfortable questions about the wisdom of rule by the masses. In a society where tradition and custom held significant sway, Socrates' persistent questioning of accepted norms was seen as deeply subversive. Socrates' influence grew rapidly, attracting a following of young men from prominent Athenian families. These disciples, including figures like Plato and Xenophon, were drawn to his intellectual rigor and moral integrity. However, this growing influence also made Socrates a target for those who saw his teachings as a threat to social stability. His association with individuals who later became enemies of democracy further damaged his reputation among the Athenian elite. The philosopher's impact on Athenian youth was particularly concerning to conservative elements within the city. Socrates encouraged his young followers to think critically about the values and beliefs they had inherited from their parents and society. This approach often led to intergenerational conflict, as young Athenians began to question the authority of their elders and the traditions they represented. Socrates' philosophical inquiries also extended into the realm of religion, challenging traditional notions of piety and the nature of the gods. He questioned the anthropomorphic depictions of deities in Greek mythology, suggesting that true virtue could not be reconciled with the often capricious behavior attributed to the gods in popular stories. The cumulative effect of Socrates' questioning and his growing influence ultimately led to his trial and execution in 399 BCE. Charged with impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, Socrates faced a jury of his peers in a public trial. During his defense, he refused to compromise his principles or beg for mercy. Instead, he reaffirmed the value of his philosophical mission, famously declaring, "The unexamined life is now the living." This steadfast commitment to his ideals, even when faced with the prospect of execution, cemented Socrates' reputation as a paragon of philosophical integrity. Though Socrates' physical presence was extinguished, his philosophical flame burned brighter than ever through his disciples, particularly his most brilliant student, Plato. Taking up his mentor's intellectual mantle, Plato would push philosophical thinking to unprecedented heights, crafting a vision of society that challenged the very foundations of Athenian democracy. In his seminal work, The Republic, Plato reimagined the entire structure of the state, proposing a system that prioritized wisdom and justice over popular will. At the heart of Plato's ideal state lay a controversial premise. Philosophers, by virtue of their superior wisdom and understanding of the forms, should rule as philosopher kings. This concept stood in stark contrast to the Athenian democratic ideal. Plato argued that a state should be governed by those most qualified to lead, much like a ship navigating treacherous waters requires a skilled and experienced crew. To ensure the incorruptibility of these philosopher kings, Plato proposed a radical reorganization of society. He advocated for the abolition of private property among the ruling class, reasoning that material possessions would distract them from their duty to the state. This communal living arrangement extended to personal relationships, with Plato suggesting a system of shared partnerships and communal child-rearing. The structure of Plato's ideal state was rigidly hierarchical, divided into three distinct classes: the rulers, philosopher kings; the guardians, soldiers and enforcers; and the producers, craftsmen, farmers, and merchants. This tripartite division was based on Plato's conception of the human soul, consisting of reason, spirit, and appetite. Just as reason should govern the soul, Plato argued that the philosopher kings, embodying reason, should govern the state. Plato proposed a system of eugenics to produce the best possible citizens for each class. The state would control reproduction, pairing individuals based on their qualities and potential offspring. Children would be raised communally, with no knowledge of their biological parents, to prevent the formation of family loyalties that might supersede loyalty to the state. Education played a central role in Plato's vision, with a carefully designed curriculum aimed at identifying and nurturing potential philosopher kings. This education would be rigorous and prolonged, lasting until the age of 50, to ensure that only the most dedicated and capable individuals would ascend to leadership roles. In Plato's ideal state, art and literature would be subject to strict censorship. He believed that many forms of art could corrupt the minds of citizens. This stance challenged the rich artistic tradition of Athens, where playwrights had long used their works to explore complex moral and social issues. The implications of Plato's vision for individual freedom were profound. In prioritizing the collective good over personal desires, the Republic presented a model of society that left little room for individual choice or self-expression. Citizens would be assigned roles based on their perceived abilities, with limited opportunity for social mobility. While Plato's ideal state was never implemented in practice, the Republic became one of the most influential works in Western political philosophy. Its ideas sparked intense debates about the nature of justice, the role of education in shaping society, and the ideal relationship between the individual and the state. These discussions would continue for centuries, influencing thinkers from Aristotle to Thomas More, and from Karl Marx to modern political theorists. Among those most profoundly influenced by, yet destined to challenge, Plato's ideas was his greatest student, Aristotle. Born in 384 BCE in Stagira, Macedonia, Aristotle arrived at Plato's academy as a young man of 17. For 20 years, he absorbed the teachings of his mentor. But as he matured intellectually, he began to question the foundations of Platonic thought. His departure from Plato's philosophy marked a significant shift in Western intellectual history. Where Plato sought truth in abstract forms and ideal concepts, Aristotle turned his attention to the physical world around him. Aristotle's empirical approach laid the groundwork for what we now recognize as the scientific method. Like a detective of nature, he emphasized observation, categorization, and systematic analysis of natural phenomena. The scope of his intellectual pursuits was vast, encompassing biology, physics, ethics, politics, and metaphysics. In each field, Aristotle applied his empirical methodology, seeking to understand the world through careful observation and logical analysis. In biology, Aristotle's contributions were particularly groundbreaking. His work, History of Animals, contained detailed descriptions of over 500 different animal species, many of which he had personally examined. This systematic approach to classification laid the foundation for modern taxonomy and zoology. His observations on the development of chicken embryos inside eggs foreshadowed modern embryology. Aristotle's investigations extended beyond the animal kingdom. He studied plant life, weather patterns, and celestial bodies, always seeking to understand the underlying principles that govern the natural world. In physics, he developed theories about motion, time, and the nature of matter that would dominate Western thought for nearly 2 millennia. While many of these theories were later disproven, his methodology of careful observation, combined with logical reasoning, set the stage for future scientific inquiry. Aristotle's most enduring contribution to Western thought was his development of formal logic. He created a system of syllogistic reasoning that provided a framework for constructing valid arguments. This system became the cornerstone of logical thinking in the Western world for centuries to come. In ethics and politics, Aristotle's approach diverged significantly from Plato's. He examined the political systems of various Greek city-states, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. From this empirical study, Aristotle concluded that a mixed form of government, combining elements of democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy, would be most stable and effective. Aristotle's ethical framework, outlined in his Nicomachean Ethics, emphasized the importance of practical wisdom in navigating moral dilemmas. He developed the concept of virtue as a mean between extremes, a nuanced approach that contrasted with Plato's more absolute moral standards. The influence of Aristotle's comprehensive philosophical system cannot be overstated. His works became the foundation for much of Western scientific and philosophical thought, shaping intellectual discourse for centuries. However, the transmission of Aristotle's ideas to later generations was not straightforward. Many of his writings were lost or fragmented in the centuries following his death. It was not until the Middle Ages that Aristotle's works were rediscovered and translated, first into Arabic and later into Latin. This rediscovery had a profound impact on Christian theology and the development of scholasticism. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas sought to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine, leading to a synthesis that would shape medieval thought and continue to influence Western philosophy to this day. But before Aristotle's ideas would make this momentous journey through time, the Greek world that birthed them underwent a dramatic transformation. As city-states crumbled under Macedonian and Roman conquests, philosophical thought shifted profoundly. The collapse of the polis ushered in political powerlessness and social instability, prompting thinkers to turn inward. This tumultuous period birthed Hellenistic schools of philosophy, each offering a unique path to personal tranquility. The Stoic school, founded by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE, emerged as a powerful force. Zeno taught in the Stoa Poikile, a painted colonnade in Athens. Stoics posited that virtue was the only true good, and one should accept fate with equanimity. They believed in a rational universe governed by divine logos, or reason. Central to Stoic philosophy was apatheia, or freedom from passion. This meant a state of mind free from excessive desires and fears. Stoics taught that external events were beyond control, but one's reactions were within one's power. As Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Epicureanism offered a different path to happiness. Founded by Epicurus, around 307 BCE. This school argued that pleasure, defined as absence of pain, aponia, and freedom from fear, ataraxia, was the highest good. Epicureans advocated for moderation and intellectual pleasure. Epicurus established his school in a garden outside Athens, emphasizing friendship and community. Epicureanism rejected fear of death and gods, arguing these prevented true happiness. Epicurus stated, "Death does not concern us, because as long as we exist, death is not here, and when it does come, we no longer exist." The skeptics, following Pyrrho of Elis, took a different approach. Pyrrho advocated for suspension of judgment, epoche, on all matters. Skeptics challenged dogmatic assertions, maintaining that for every argument, an equally compelling counter-argument could be made. Carneades later developed the concept of probabilism. Cynicism, exemplified by Diogenes of Sinope, was perhaps the most radical school. Cynics rejected societal conventions, advocating for simplicity and self-sufficiency. Diogenes lived in a ceramic jar in Athens' marketplace, eschewing possessions and norms. He famously walked through Athens with a lit lamp in daylight, claiming to search for an honest man. These Hellenistic schools shared a focus on practical ethics and individual happiness. They offered competing visions of living well amid instability. Stoics emphasized virtue and acceptance. Epicureans sought pleasure through moderation. Skeptics advocated suspending judgment, and cynics called for rejecting societal norms. Each provided a unique response to their time's challenges, shaping philosophical thought for generations to come. So, the influence of these schools would soon extend far beyond the Greek world, as Rome's expanding empire created an unexpected bridge between cultures. As Roman power ascended, their pragmatic minds encountered these profound Greek philosophical traditions. This collision of worldviews, practical Roman governance meeting abstract Greek thought, sparked an intellectual transformation that would shape the course of Western civilization. Cicero emerged as a pivotal figure in this philosophical evolution. A statesman, orator, and thinker, he stood at the crossroads of Greek wisdom and Roman ambition. Cicero recognized the value of Greek philosophy, but adapted it to the Roman context, believing that philosophy should serve practical ends in governance and civic life. In De Republica, Cicero laid out his vision for an ideal state, drawing inspiration from Plato, but tempering it with Roman pragmatism. He advocated for a mixed constitution that balanced the interests of different social classes, combining elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. This concept bears striking resemblance to modern systems of checks and balances, where executive, legislative, and judicial branches counterbalance each other to prevent the concentration of power. Cicero's philosophy emphasized the concept of duty, or officium. He believed individuals had obligations to family, community, and state that superseded personal desires. This idea resonated with Roman values of civic virtue and service to the Republic. In De Officiis, Cicero explored the nature of moral duty and its application in public life, providing a practical guide for Roman leaders. The Roman thinker also contributed significantly to rhetoric. In works like De Orator, Cicero argued that the ideal orator should combine eloquence with wisdom, ethics, and broad knowledge. This concept of the well-rounded statesman-philosopher became a model for education and leadership in the Roman world and beyond. As Rome transitioned from republic to empire, Seneca the Younger emerged as another influential philosopher. Serving as advisor to Emperor Nero, Seneca faced moral quandaries of wielding power in a system prone to corruption. His writings on ethics offered guidance to Romans navigating this complex political landscape. Seneca's philosophy, rooted in Stoicism, emphasized inner virtue as a bulwark against fortune's vicissitudes. He argued that true freedom came from mastery over one's thoughts and desires. In Letters to Lucilius, Seneca explored themes of resilience and self-control, offering practical advice that resonates even today. One can imagine a Roman senator, torn between duty and ambition, finding solace in Seneca's words. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Seneca's position, at the heart of imperial power, gave his writings unique perspective. He grappled with maintaining moral integrity amid political intrigue. In De Clementia, addressed to Nero, Seneca argued for mercy and moderation in rulership, presenting a vision of enlightened monarchy. Both Cicero and Seneca contributed to a distinctly Roman synthesis of Greek philosophical ideas. They applied abstract concepts to concrete challenges of Roman life and governance. This pragmatic approach to philosophy had far-reaching consequences, influencing not only Roman thought, but also shaping the development of Western civilization. Their works continue to offer insights into the delicate balance between power, duty, and personal virtue in public life. Yet even as Rome's greatest minds refined this philosophical inheritance, a profound transformation was brewing at the empire's edges. From an unlikely corner of the Roman world emerged an intellectual revolution that would reshape everything: the rise of Christianity. This nascent faith, born in a distant province, challenged centuries of established philosophical tradition and forced thinkers to grapple with questions that neither Athens nor Rome had fully prepared them to answer. The spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire brought about a profound transformation in the landscape of Western thought. It introduced beliefs and values that stood in stark contrast to the prevailing Greco-Roman philosophical traditions. At the heart of this clash was the Christian emphasis on faith and divine revelation, which challenged the rationalist approach that had dominated Western philosophy since the time of the pre-Socratics. Early Christian thinkers faced the task of reconciling their faith with the rich philosophical heritage of the Greco-Roman world. Justin Martyr, a second-century apologist, argued that Christianity was the fulfillment of Greek philosophy. He saw partial truths in Greek thought that were fully realized in Christian revelation. Clement of Alexandria built upon this approach, viewing Greek philosophy as a preparatory tool for understanding Christian truth. The concept of logos served as a significant bridge between Greek philosophy and Christian theology. In Greek thought, logos represented reason and the ordering principle of the universe. Christian thinkers reinterpreted this concept, identifying the logos with the divine word of God and Jesus Christ. This synthesis of Greek philosophical language and Christian belief is exemplified in the Gospel of John's opening line. In the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Christianity reshaped fundamental philosophical questions. It introduced a linear view of time and progress, challenging the cyclical perspective prevalent in Greek thought. This new worldview presented a created universe with a definite beginning and end, framed within a narrative of fall and redemption. Such a perspective had profound implications for understanding reality, human purpose, and the direction of history. Augustine of Hippo emerged as a pivotal figure in synthesizing classical philosophy and Christian doctrine. His works addressed complex issues such as the nature of evil, free will, and the relationship between divine foreknowledge and human freedom. In The City of God, Augustine presented a Christian philosophy of history that would shape Western thought for centuries, arguing for two distinct realms, the earthly city and the heavenly city. The ascendance of Christianity led to a reorientation of philosophical inquiry towards theological questions. As the Church became a dominant intellectual force, philosophers increasingly focused on issues such as the nature of God, the relationship between faith and reason, and scriptural interpretation. This shift set the stage for the development of medieval scholasticism, which sought to reconcile classical philosophy with Christian theology. The tension between faith and reason, brought to the forefront by Christianity's rise, became a defining feature of Western thought. This intellectual struggle gave rise to new schools of thought and sparked debates that continue to resonate in modern philosophy and theology, shaping our understanding of knowledge, belief, and the limits of human reason. While the Christian world wrestled with these fundamental questions, another intellectual tradition was quietly gathering momentums in the East. The Islamic Golden Age, spanning from the 8th to the 14th centuries, saw a remarkable flourishing of knowledge and innovation. Muslim scholars, operating in the lands once conquered by Alexander the Great, became the true preservers and advancers of classical philosophy. The translation movement, initiated by the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, played a crucial role in this intellectual renaissance. Vast numbers of Greek, Persian, and Indian texts were translated into Arabic, preserving ancient wisdom and laying the foundation for Islamic innovation. This effort served as a bridge of wisdom, connecting East and West. Al-Kindi, born in Kufa, Iraq, around 801 CE, emerged as a pioneering figure known as the philosopher of the Arabs. He engaged deeply with Greek thought, writing prolifically on subjects ranging from metaphysics to music theory. His work on optics and the nature of light influenced later European scientists, including Roger Bacon. El-Farabi, born in Farab, Kazakhstan, around 870 CE, developed a comprehensive philosophical system harmonizing Plato and Aristotle with Islamic thought. Earning the title the second teacher after Aristotle, he explored the concept of the virtuous city, inspired by Plato's Republic, in an Islamic context. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, was born in 980 CE near Bukhara, in present-day Uzbekistan. This polymath's work spanned philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. His Book of Healing synthesized Aristotelian and Neoplatonic ideas with Islamic theology, while his Canon of Medicine remained a standard medical text in Europe for centuries. The harmonization of Greek philosophy with Islamic doctrine faced challenges. Al-Ghazali, born in Tus, Persia, in 1058 CE, critiqued the rationalist approach in his work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. He emphasized the limits of human reason in understanding divine truth and advocated for a more mystical approach to knowledge. Ibn Rushd, known as Averroes, defended the compatibility of Aristotelian philosophy with Islamic doctrine. Born in Córdoba, Spain, in 1126 ETE, he wrote extensive commentaries on Aristotle's works. His defense of reason and philosophy, The Incoherence of the Incoherence, became a seminal text in both Islamic and Christian philosophical traditions. These Islamic philosophers not only preserved Greek thought, but expanded and refined it. They grappled with fundamental questions about existence, reason, and the ideal society, leading to advancements in logic, metaphysics, and ethics that would later influence European scholasticism. The transmission of this knowledge to Europe began during the 12th century. Toledo, Spain, became a major center for translating Arabic texts into Latin, attracting scholars from across Europe to access the wealth of knowledge preserved and advanced by Islamic thinkers. The impact of Islamic philosophy on Western thought was profound. Thomas Aquinas drew heavily on Ibn Rushd's works to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine. The rediscovery of classical texts and their Islamic commentaries sparked renewed interest in Greek philosophy, contributing to the intellectual ferment that would lead to the Renaissance and shaping the course of Western intellectual history for centuries to come. These philosophical treasures, preserved and enriched by Islamic scholars, found fertile ground in the evolving intellectual landscape of medieval Europe. Within Christendom, the reintroduction of Aristotle's complete works sparked a philosophical revolution. This era, known as medieval scholasticism, saw Christian thinkers grappling with the challenge of reconciling faith and reason in ways that would profoundly influence Western philosophy for centuries to come. The scholastic movement began in earnest during the 11th century, as European scholars sought to apply logical reasoning to theological questions. Anselm of Canterbury, often considered the father of scholasticism, exemplified this approach with his ontological argument for God's existence. Anselm's formulation posited that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived, arguing that God must necessarily exist in reality, not just in the mind. This bold attempt to prove God's existence through pure reason marked a significant departure from earlier Christian thought, which had largely relied on faith and revelation. Anselm's work set the stage for a new era of philosophical inquiry within the Christian tradition, one that sought to use the tools of logic and dialectic to elucidate and defend religious doctrines. The scholastic movement reached its zenith with Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. Aquinas undertook the monumental task of synthesizing Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology in his magnum opus, the Summa Theologica. This comprehensive work addressed a vast array of philosophical and theological questions, from the nature of God to the intricacies of human morality. Aquinas's efforts to harmonize faith and reason represented the culmination of centuries of scholastic thought. One of the central debates that occupied scholastic thinkers was the problem of universals. This philosophical conundrum concerned the nature of abstract concepts and their relationship to particular objects. Realists argued that universals existed as real entities, independent of individual things, while nominalists contended that universals were merely names or mental constructs with no independent existence. This debate had far-reaching implications for Christian theology. The concept of the Trinity, for instance, hinged on the idea that three distinct persons could share a single divine nature. The realist position offered a philosophical framework for understanding this mystery, while the nominalist view posed challenges to traditional interpretations of Christian doctrine. As scholasticism evolved, some thinkers began to push back against what they saw as overly complex and speculative philosophical systems. William of Ockham advocated for a principle of parsimony that came to be known as Occam's razor, stating that simpler explanations should be preferred over more complex ones. This approach challenged many of the elaborate metaphysical systems developed by earlier scholastics. The scholastic movement's emphasis on logical reasoning and systematic analysis left an indelible mark on Western intellectual history. It developed sophisticated tools for philosophical and theological inquiry that continue to influence modern thought. The quaestio method, which involved examining a question from multiple angles before reaching a conclusion, foreshadowed modern academic discourse. However, the tensions between faith and reason, explored by scholastic thinkers, also set the stage for later conflicts between religion and science. As empirical observation and experimentation gained prominence in the Renaissance and early modern period, the elaborate metaphysical systems of the scholastics came under increasing scrutiny. The rise of modern science would ultimately challenge many of the assumptions underlying scholastic thought, leading to new philosophical paradigms. This intellectual upheaval coincided with and helped fuel a broader cultural transformation. As medieval certainties began to falter, Renaissance humanism emerged as a powerful new force in European thought. Breaking from scholasticism's rigid frameworks, humanist scholars sought to revitalize Western culture by returning to classical antiquity's wisdom. These thinkers turned to ancient texts in their original languages, believing these works held the key to moral improvement and practical wisdom. Francisco Petrarca, known as Petrarch, stood at the forefront of this movement. Hailed as the father of humanism, Petrarch championed the study of classical Latin literature, particularly Cicero's works. Upon first encountering Cicero's letters, Petrarch was moved to tears, feeling as if he were conversing with a dear friend across the centuries. This emotional connection to ancient wisdom fueled his belief that the studia humanitatis, or humanities, could cultivate virtue and eloquence far more effectively than scholastic logic and metaphysics. The humanist approach to scholarship emphasizing critical analysis and philological methods, soon began to challenge long-held beliefs. Lorenzo Valla exemplified this new spirit of inquiry when he exposed the donation of Constantine as a medieval forgery. This revelation not only undermined the Church's claims to political power, but also demonstrated humanism's potential to overturn established orthodoxies. As humanist ideas spread, they reshaped conceptions of human nature and potential. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola's Oration on the Dignity of Man presented a vision of humanity as uniquely endowed with the freedom to shape its own nature. This anthropocentric philosophy contrasted sharply with the medieval emphasis on human fallenness and dependence on divine grace. The movement also gave rise to new approaches to politics and ethics. Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince advocated a ruthlessly pragmatic approach to statecraft, arguing that effective rulers must sometimes set aside conventional morality to maintain power and ensure stability. This stark realism challenged the idealized visions of Christian kingship that had dominated medieval political theory. While Machiavelli pushed the boundaries of traditional morality, others sought to reform existing institutions from within. Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam advocated for a return to early Christianity's simplicity and purity. Erasmus criticized the Church's corruption and worldliness, arguing that true piety lay in the imitation of Christ's example. His emphasis on personal faith and direct engagement with Scripture would later influence Protestant reformers like Martin Luther. Dartert Renaissance humanism's impact extended far beyond scholarship and theology. By shifting intellectual inquiry's focus from abstract speculation to human affairs and practical knowledge, it laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. The humanists' emphasis on empirical observation and critical analysis prefigured the scientific method, while their celebration of human potential and individual dignity paved the way for Enlightenment concepts of natural rights and human equality. The humanist movement's legacy continues to shape modern thought. The emphasis on critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning remains a cornerstone of contemporary education and scientific inquiry. Humanist approaches to textual analysis and interpretation have evolved into modern disciplines like literary criticism and historiography. Moreover, the humanist belief in the value of individual expression and creativity continues to influence art, literature, and philosophy, demonstrating the enduring impact of this Renaissance intellectual revolution. This humanist emphasis on reason and empirical observation would soon catalyze an even more dramatic transformation of human knowledge. As the 16th century dawned, a new spirit of systematic inquiry began to challenge long-held beliefs and traditional authorities. This intellectual upheaval, known as the scientific revolution, would fundamentally transform philosophy, science, and society at large. At the heart of this revolution was the development of the scientific method, a systematic approach to investigating phenomena. Francis Bacon, an English philosopher and statesman, played a crucial role in articulating this new methodology. Bacon advocated for inductive reasoning and emphasized the importance of empirical evidence, criticizing the reliance on ancient authorities that had dominated medieval scholasticism. As Bacon formulated his ideas, Galileo Galilei was putting similar principles into practice in Italy. Galileo's innovative use of mathematics to describe natural phenomena revolutionized the study of physics and astronomy. His careful observations and experiments challenged Aristotelian physics, which had held sway for nearly 2 millennia. Galileo's telescopic observations provided empirical evidence that contradicted established beliefs. His discovery of Jupiter's moons and the phases of Venus lent support to the Copernican heliocentric model of the solar system, challenging the Earth-centered view sanctioned by both religious and academic authorities. The conflict between Galileo's findings and the Catholic Church's doctrine highlighted the tension between empirical observation and traditional sources of knowledge. This clash became emblematic of the broader upheaval caused by the scientific revolution, as new discoveries repeatedly challenged long-held beliefs about the nature of reality. While Galileo focused on observation and experimentation, René Descartes sought to establish a solid foundation for knowledge through philosophical reasoning. Descartes' method of systematic doubt led him to his famous conclusion, "I think, therefore I am," which he saw as an unshakable starting point for building certain knowledge. As the scientific revolution progressed, Isaac Newton emerged as a towering figure who synthesized and extended the work of his predecessors. Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation provided a comprehensive mathematical description of the physical world. His work unified terrestrial and celestial mechanics, showing that the same principles governed the fall of an apple and the orbits of planets. Newton's success in explaining diverse phenomena with a few fundamental laws had a profound impact on philosophical thinking. It suggested that the universe operated according to fixed, knowable principles that could be uncovered through careful observation and mathematical analysis. This mechanical worldview came to dominate scientific and philosophical thought in the following centuries. The scientific advances of this period raised new philosophical questions about the nature of reality, causality, and human knowledge. As empirical methods proved increasingly successful in explaining natural phenomena, philosophers grappled with the implications for metaphysics and epistemology. These questions fueled philosophical debates for generations to come, with empiricists emphasizing the role of sensory experience in forming knowledge, while rationalists argued for the importance of a priori reasoning. This intellectual ferment set the stage for an even broader transformation of European thought and society. As the 18th century dawned, the age of Enlightenment emerged, challenging the foundations of European society. This intellectual movement, driven by reason and skepticism, sought to re-examine and reform every aspect of human knowledge and society. John Locke's ideas on natural rights and the social contract profoundly influenced modern concepts of democracy and human rights. Locke argued that individuals possessed inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property, and that government's primary purpose was to protect these rights. This notion challenged the prevailing doctrine of the divine right of kings. Across the Channel, French philosophers continued to push boundaries. Voltaire championed freedom of speech and religious tolerance. His famous quip, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," born from his experiences with censorship, encapsulated the Enlightenment's commitment to free expression. Jean-Jacques Rousseau grappled with political legitimacy and the social contract. In The Social Contract, he introduced the concept of the general will as the basis for legitimate government, arguing that true freedom required individuals to willingly submit to laws reflecting society's collective interest. In Prussia, Immanuel Kant sought to establish the limits and possibilities of human reason. His critical philosophy bridged rationalism and empiricism, arguing that while knowledge begins with experience, it's shaped by our mind's inherent structures. Kant's Copernican revolution shifted focus from reality's nature to how the human mind perceives it. The Encyclopédie project, led by Denis Diderot and Jean-Laurent d'Alembert, aimed to compile all human knowledge. This work became a powerful tool for spreading Enlightenment ideas, often subtly critiquing on established authorities. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason led to conflicts with religious institutions. Many thinkers advocated for a more rational approach to religion, questioning church authority and challenging traditional scripture interpretations. This tension between faith and reason became a defining feature of modern Western thought. As Enlightenment ideas spread, they impacted political systems. Frederick the Great of Prussia styled himself an enlightened despot, implementing reforms while maintaining absolute power. Catherine the Great of Russia corresponded with philosophers, though her implementation of Enlightenment ideals was limited. The most dramatic manifestations of Enlightenment thought came through two major revolutions. In America, the Founding Fathers drew on Enlightenment philosophy to craft a nation based on individual liberty, representative government, and separation of powers. The Declaration of Independence clearly expressed Enlightenment ideals. In France, the Revolution of 1789 was partly driven by Enlightenment ideas. The cry of liberté, égalité, fraternité echoed Enlightenment values as revolutionaries sought to overturn the ancien regime and establish a new social order based on reason and natural rights. While this dramatic political upheaval captured Europe's attention, equally revolutionary changes were taking shape in the realm of philosophy. As the French Revolution shook the foundations of European society, a quiet revolution in thought was unfolding in the city of Königsberg, Prussia. Immanuel Kant, a philosopher of remarkable intellect and discipline, was in the process of reshaping the very nature of human understanding. His work would prove transformative, challenging our most basic assumptions about knowledge, morality, and the limits of human reason. Kant sought to resolve a long-standing conflict in philosophy between rationalism and empiricism. Rationalists believed that pure reason could lead to certain knowledge about the world, while empiricists argued that all knowledge ultimately derived from sensory experience. This debate had reached an impasse, with neither side able to conclusively refute the other. In response, Kant proposed what he called a Copernican revolution in thinking. Like turning a mirror on reality itself, Kant argued that we needed to fundamentally rethink our approach to knowledge. Instead of assuming that our minds conform to objects in the world, he proposed that objects must conform to our minds. This shift in perspective formed the core of Kant's critique of pure reason. Kant argued that human beings can never directly know things as they are in themselves. Instead, we can only know things as they appear to us, through our senses and mental faculties. Our minds actively structure our experience of the world, imposing certain categories and forms of intuition onto the raw data of sensation. This insight meant that certain aspects of reality would always remain beyond our grasp, while also allowing for the possibility of objective knowledge within the realm of experience. Kant's approach extended to ethics as well. In his Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, he introduced the categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim, by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. This principle represented a departure from previous ethical theories, grounding morality in pure reason, rather than divine command or utilitarian calculations. The categorical imperative emphasized the inherent dignity and autonomy of rational beings, arguing that people should always be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end. This idea would go on to influence modern conceptions of human rights and personal freedom. Kant's critical philosophy challenged both dogmatic metaphysics and radical skepticism. He argued against the possibility of knowing ultimate reality or proving the existence of God through pure reason, while also rejecting the skeptical conclusion that no certain knowledge was possible. Instead, Kant carved out a middle ground, arguing for the possibility of objective knowledge within the limits of human experience and reason. The Kantian revolution raised profound questions about the nature of reality and the human mind. If we can never know things as they truly are, what are the implications for fields like metaphysics and theology? How should we understand the relationship between the world as it appears to us and the world as it might exist independently of our perception? These questions would occupy philosophers for generations to come, cementing Kant's place as one of the most influential thinkers in the history of Western philosophy. His emphasis on the limits of human knowledge and understanding would inspire others to push these boundaries even further. As the intellectual landscape of Europe continued to evolve in the wake of Kant's critical philosophy, two thinkers emerged who would propose an even more radical vision of reality. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Karl Marx developed theories that suggested conflict and contradiction were not obstacles to understanding, but the very engines of progress. Their ideas would reshape our view of history and human nature, challenging static conceptions of society and sparking revolutions both intellectual and political. Hegel, born in Stuttgart in 1770, developed a comprehensive philosophical system based on the concept of dialectical progression. He saw history as a dynamic process driven by the unfolding of Geist, often translated as spirit or mind. This Geist, for Hegel, was the collective consciousness of humanity, constantly evolving towards greater self-awareness and freedom. Central to Hegel's philosophy was his dialectical method, which proposed that historical and intellectual progress occurs through a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This process can be likened to a complex chess game, where each move, thesis, prompts a counter-move, antithesis, leading to a new board configuration, synthesis, that sets the stage for the next round of play. Hegel applied this dialectical approach to various domains of human experience, from logic and metaphysics to history and politics. In his Phenomenology of Spirit, he traced the development of human consciousness from basic sense perception to absolute knowledge. He argued that world history was a rational process, moving towards the realization of human freedom, with each stage representing a particular manifestation of spirit. While Hegel's philosophy was highly abstract, its influence on subsequent thinkers was immense. Karl Marx, born in Trier in 1818, engaged deeply with Hegelian ideas, transforming the dialectical method into a powerful critique of capitalist society and a vision for revolutionary change. Marx agreed with Hegel that history progressed through dialectical stages, but rejected his idealism. Instead of seeing ideas or spirit as the primary driver of historical change, Marx argued that material conditions, particularly economic relations, were the foundation upon which all other aspects of society were built. This perspective, known as historical materialism, proposed that the way societies organize their economic production shapes their political institutions, legal systems, and dominant ideologies. In Marx's view, each stage of history was characterized by a particular mode of production, with its own class structure and social relations. The transition from one stage to another occurred through class struggle, as oppressed classes sought to overthrow the existing order. Capitalism, Marx argued, was merely the latest stage in this historical process, one that would inevitably give way to socialism and eventually to a classless communist society. Marx's critique of capitalism was both economic and philosophical. He argued that the capitalist system, while enormously productive, was inherently exploitative and alienating. Workers, separated from the products of their labor and treated as mere commodities, experienced a profound sense of estrangement from their own human nature. The ideas of Hegel and Marx represented a fundamental challenge to existing social and political orders. By proposing that conflict and contradiction were essential to progress, they undermined conservative ideologies that sought to maintain the status quo. Their theories suggested that change was not only possible, but inevitable, providing intellectual ammunition for revolutionary movements around the world. This radical questioning of established values and structures would find an even more forceful voice in the work of another German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844 in Prussia, emerged as one of the most controversial and influential philosophers of the 19th century. His radical critique of traditional values and metaphysics challenged the very foundations of Western civilization, igniting debates that continue to this day. Nietzsche's philosophy represented a seismic shift in Western thought. He rejected the notion of absolute truth, arguing for a perspectivism that viewed all knowledge as interpretation. This stance challenged centuries of philosophical tradition that sought to uncover universal truths about reality. Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead signaled a profound crisis in Western culture's religious and moral foundations. This statement, far from being a simple assertion of atheism, suggested that the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and scientific inquiry had effectively undermined the basis for religious belief. The resulting void in Western civilization was akin to a cultural earthquake, leaving society without its traditional moral compass and searching for new sources of meaning and purpose. In response to this crisis, Nietzsche launched a scathing critique of traditional morality, particularly Christian ethics. He characterized Christian morality as a slave morality, arising from the resentment of the weak against the strong. Instead, he advocated for a master morality that would affirm life, embrace struggle, and celebrate human potential. Central to Nietzsche's philosophy was the concept of the Übermensch, often translated as overman or superman. This figure represented Nietzsche's ideal of human self-overcoming and creativity, capable of creating new values in the absence of God and traditional morality. The Übermensch would embrace life in all its complexity and suffering, affirming existence without recourse to otherworldly consolations. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power further challenged both religious and rationalist views of human motivation. He posited that the fundamental drive in human nature was towards the expansion of power, manifesting itself in all aspects of life, from the biological to the cultural and spiritual. The philosopher's work also introduced the concept of eternal recurrence, a thought experiment that asked individuals to consider whether they would be willing to live their lives over and over again for eternity. This idea served as both a metaphysical proposition and an ethical challenge. Nietzsche's writing style was as revolutionary as his ideas, employing aphorisms, parables, and poetic language to convey his thoughts. This style reflected his belief in the importance of individual interpretation and the impossibility of capturing truth in a single definitive system. The impact of Nietzsche's philosophy on 20th century thought was profound, influencing a wide range of intellectual movements, from existentialism to postmodernism. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Martin Heidegger grappled with Nietzsche's legacy in their own work. His critique of traditional values and emphasis on individual creativity resonated with many artists and writers, shaping the cultural landscape of the modern era. The complexity and often contradictory nature of his writings have led to ongoing debates about their true meaning and implications, ensuring that his ideas continue to challenge and provoke thinkers to this day. His radical questioning of traditional values and meaning would prove particularly influential for a new philosophical movement emerging in Europe. In the wake of Nietzsche's proclamation of God's death, existentialism emerged to confront the implications of a universe devoid of inherent meaning. While Søren Kierkegaard laid the groundwork with his emphasis on subjective truth and personal faith, it was the 20th century thinkers who fully developed existentialist philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre articulated the core tenet of existentialism with his assertion that existence precedes essence. This radical claim challenged traditional notions of human nature, suggesting that individuals are thrust into existence without predetermined purpose. Sartre's philosophy emphasized the inescapable freedom and responsibility that comes with human consciousness. We are, in his view, condemned to be free, forced to make choices that define our existence without the guidance of external authorities or predetermined values. This freedom, while potentially liberating, brings with it a profound sense of anguish and responsibility. Sartre explored this through his concepts of bad faith and authenticity. Bad faith manifests when individuals deny their fundamental freedom, as in the case of a waiter who overly identifies with his role, acting as if he were nothing more than his job. Authenticity, conversely, involves embracing one's freedom and accepting full responsibility for one's choices. Albert Camus, while often associated with existentialism, developed his own philosophical approach centered on the concept of the absurd. Camus argued that the human desire for meaning inevitably clashes with the indifferent universe, resulting in the experience of absurdity. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus explored how individuals might find meaning in the face of this fundamental absurdity, advocating for a form of rebellion against meaninglessness. Simone de Beauvoir applied existentialist ideas to questions of gender and social roles. In The Second Sex, de Beauvoir challenged essentialist notions of femininity, arguing that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. This perspective highlighted how social and cultural factors shape gender identity, rather than innate biological differences. The existentialist emphasis on individual freedom and responsibility had far-reaching implications for ethics and personal identity. By rejecting predetermined moral systems, existentialism placed the burden of ethical decision-making squarely on the individual. This perspective led to a focus on situational ethics and personal responsibility, challenging traditional notions of moral absolutes. Martin Heidegger, while not strictly an existentialist, profoundly influenced the movement with his phenomenological approach to human existence. His concept of being in the world, Dasein, offered a new way of understanding human existence as fundamentally engaged with and shaped by its environment and relationships. However, existentialism was not without its critics. Some argued that its emphasis on individual freedom ignored the very real social and economic constraints that limit human choices. Others saw in existentialism a potentially dangerous form of moral relativism that could lead to nihilism or a lack of social responsibility. Despite these criticisms, existentialism's influence on 20th century thought and culture was profound. Its themes of alienation, authenticity, and the search for meaning in an absurd world resonated deeply with a generation that had lived through 2 world wars and faced the threat of nuclear annihilation. Existentialist ideas permeated literature, art, and popular culture, influencing writers such as Samuel Beckett and Franz Kafka, and finding expression in movements like abstract expressionism and the French New Wave in cinema. This questioning of meaning and truth would soon give way to an even more radical philosophical movement. As existentialism grappled with meaning in an absurd world, postmodernism emerged in the mid-20th century to challenge the very notion of truth itself. This intellectual revolution sought to dismantle the grand narratives and totalizing theories that had long claimed to explain reality. Postmodern thinkers viewed language and knowledge as a complex puzzle with missing pieces, forever incomplete and open to interpretation. Jacques Derrida's method of deconstruction aimed to reveal the instability of meaning in language and texts. He argued that words and concepts do not have fixed, essential meanings, but are defined by their relationships to other words and concepts. This approach undermined the idea of absolute truth and highlighted the inherent contradictions in philosophical and literary texts. Building on Derrida's work, Jean-François Lyotard critiqued meta-narrative in his influential The Postmodern Condition. He argued against overarching explanatory frameworks such as Marxism or religious doctrines, proposing instead a multiplicity of localized language games. This perspective challenged the authority of any single, universal account of truth or progress. Michel Foucault further expanded postmodern thought by exploring the intricate relationship between knowledge and power. He revealed how discourses shape social reality and determine what is considered true or false, normal or deviant. Foucault's work exposed how institutions exert power through the production and control of knowledge, challenging the notion of objective truth. The postmodern critique extended to conceptions of identity and gender. Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity revolutionized feminist philosophy and queer theory. Butler argued that gender is not an innate essence, but a series of repeated acts that create the illusion of a stable identity. This perspective challenged essentialist notions of masculinity and femininity, opening up new ways of understanding gender's fluidity and social construction. Jean Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality suggested that simulations have replaced authentic experiences in contemporary society. He argued that the proliferation of media and technology has created a world where representations of reality are more real to us than reality itself. This blurring of boundaries between the real and the simulated raised profound questions about the nature of truth and experience in the postmodern age. The impact of postmodernism on philosophy and broader intellectual discourse was profound and far-reaching. By emphasizing plurality, difference, and the constructed nature of knowledge, postmodern thinkers radically reshaped how we understand truth, identity, and the role of philosophy itself. Their critiques exposed the limitations of traditional philosophical methods and opened up new avenues for inquiry. Despite significant criticism, including concerns about moral relativism and the undermining of social action, postmodern ideas continue to influence a wide range of disciplines. The emphasis on plurality and difference resonated with marginalized groups and contributed to the development of identity politics and multicultural discourse. As the 20th century drew to a close, the digital revolution and the rise of the Internet seem to embody many postmodern concepts. The decentralized, non-hierarchical structure of the web, with its hyperlinks and user-generated content, mirrored postmodern ideas about the fragmentation of knowledge and the multiplicity of perspectives. These technological changes would not only exemplify philosophical theories, but also generate entirely new questions for philosophical inquiry. As the digital age unfolds, philosophers grapple with unprecedented ethical dilemmas and existential questions. The 21st century has ushered in a new era of philosophical inquiry, contending with rapid technological advancement, climate change, and shifting global politics. Contemporary thinkers address these complex issues, often traversing traditional disciplinary boundaries. Environmental ethics has emerged as a critical field, examining sustainability, intergenerational justice, and the moral status of non-human entities. The concept of the Anthropocene has sparked debates about humanity's responsibility to the planet and future generations. Thinkers balance human needs against nature preservation, questioning whether nature possesses intrinsic rights beyond its utilitarian value. The philosophy of mind and cognitive science explore consciousness, free will, and artificial intelligence implications. As AI systems advance, questions about intelligence and consciousness gain urgency. Brain-computer interfaces and neuroscience developments challenge notions of selfhood and identity. Bioethics takes center stage as genetic engineering, neurotechnology, and life extension push human boundaries. Gene editing raises questions about designing future generations and exacerbating inequalities. Philosophers consider the implications of extended lifespans on our understanding of the human life cycle and mortality's meaning. Global justice theories examine inequality, migration, and wealthy nations' obligations to poorer ones. Cosmopolitanism has been revitalized by global challenges like climate change and pandemics. Thinkers explore how sovereignty and citizenship might evolve in an interconnected world. Digital ethics examines privacy, surveillance, and social media's impact on relationships and democratic institutions. Philosophers question data governance and individual privacy in the digital age. Misinformation and social media echo chambers raise concerns about democratic discourse and truth. Contemporary philosophy engages with scientific, technological, and social developments, demonstrating critical thinking's relevance in addressing global challenges. These complex issues often require interdisciplinary approaches, with philosophers collaborating across fields. Neuroethics combines neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy to address brain research implications. As brain understanding grows, questions arise about free will, moral responsibility, and mind-reading technologies, challenging notions of personhood and autonomy. The philosophy of technology examines how technological systems shape human values and behavior. Thinkers explore technological determinism and the coevolution of technology and culture, questioning our ability to make ethical decisions about rapid technological change. The history of Western philosophy unfolds as a saga of intellectual conflict and resolution, driving progress and reshaping our understanding of reality, ethics, and human nature. From ancient Greeks to contemporary thinkers, philosophers have consistently challenged orthodoxies and opened new avenues of inquiry. As we confront 21st century challenges, philosophical discourse remains indispensable. The ability to question assumptions, analyze arguments, and envision alternatives equips us to navigate an uncertain future. This legacy of rigorous inquiry and intellectual courage is essential for addressing pressing issues and forging a path towards enlightenment. By embracing critical thinking in our own lives, we contribute to this ongoing narrative of human progress.